Kenya's Finance Act 2021 was signed into law by President Uhuru Kenyatta in June. The act has introduced a number of changes that will align Kenya with international best practices. These include the introduction of country-by-country reporting for multinational enterprises, as well as the introduction of more stringent regulations on thin capitalization. And the act has also introduced a number of changes designed to enhance the tax base by getting more transactions into the ambit of transaction and increasing the tax on other transactions. It is also clear from the changes to the scope of digital taxes that the government sees this as a potential area for revenue growth. Some of the enactments appear to be reactions by the Kenya Revenue Authority to recent spates of disputes that it has lost at the Tax Appeals Tribunal and the High Court. Call rates are up across all of Kenya's three main network operators. Costs for both mobile data and home internet, as well as SMS, are up too. New charges have also been added to what Kenyans pay every time they take a mobile loan, which is very popular in Kenya. Kenya seems to have boldly spelt out its tax policy at the same level as developed OECD member states such as France, Germany, Israel, Italy, Japan, Turkey, the UK, and the United States. This move should give foreign multinational enterprises confidence in investing in the country. However, the exemption of exported services may harm instead of protect the various hubs of local professionals. The COVID-19 pandemic impacted government's ability to meet its expenditure requirements and pressure for additional resources to service the current debt load was high. This has led to the additional tax revenue mobilization measures contained in the act as Kenya looks to finance the ambitious 2021-2022 budget of 3.6 trillion Kenyan shillings. Today, we're looking at Kenya's Finance Act 2021. I'm Tolulokwe Adileru Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Now joining me from Nairobi, Kenya is Ken Gichinga. He's the chief economist at Mentoria Economics. Ken, welcome once again and good afternoon Kenyan time to you from us here at Business Edge.
Good afternoon, Tolulope.
So let's get started with this. There was also a Finance Act that was passed into law in 2021 as well as in 2020. So this 2021 seems to be an updated version of what was also amended in 2020 as well. And finance laws and regulations are not things that you typically see amended year after year, fresh amendments like that. So what needed to be amended between last year and this year to bring about the Finance Act 2021? Or were there changes that were basically held out from the 2021 that needed to be brought up to speed for 2021?
Well, that's a great question. And indeed, there has been a need to raise revenue from the government's perspective, not least because of the growing debt burden that needs to be serviced. So you're right. Typically, you not see such many amendments, but I think it speaks to the fiscal strain that debt has been causing the country, and the need for the country to be able to raise more revenue, if only to be able to service those debts. So some of the amendments will come into effect July 1st, but some of them will come into effect January 1st next year.
Okay. All right. So we're getting some staggered implementation there. But one of the big things that we've talked about as well is the digital services tax that Kenya is introducing. We've seen a number of the big foreign and global tech companies like Google and Facebook, Netflix as well, that have started to implement this digital tax that Kenya has kicked in. But Kenyans, like many other Africans, they're spending more time online. They're spending more money online doing business. So it's also a natural progression that we would expect to see African governments attempt to find a way to tax the online business space. But we've also seen what happened with this kind of tax in Uganda. Do you think that Kenya has found a balance when it comes to this digital services tax, or are you anticipating maybe unfortunate people running away from the online space because of the taxation?
Well, I think it's a pretty unfortunate outcome because when COVID hit the country last year, lots of people lost their jobs. So a lot of people went into enterprise and into business. And for many of them, their business was being conducted in the online space where they would showcase their wares on social media platforms. So for that area now to come under taxation, I think it's going to hurt digital enterprise. And that is one of the areas that a lot of young people are able to put food on the table and to have some form of income. So I think it was a bit myopic, given that this is an income generator for so many young people to be able to look for money in that sector.
So how do you think government should handle it? Is it that government should wait maybe a year or two, let the effects of the pandemic sort of taper out? Or are you saying that overall, for an extended period of time, you don't think that government should be taxing digital services?
Well, it's more of the latter. It should not, because all these taxations come under what is called consumption tax. All these VATs and excise tax and sales tax, what they do is they increase the cost of living, they drive up inflation, they make ordinary services out of the reach of the ordinary mwananchi, the ordinary citizen, and really they really generate a lot of unrest. I've always said we need to look at production taxes. This is on corporate income tax, individual income tax, property tax. Those are the areas where you can legitimately raise revenue without creating much affinity towards government policy.
Interesting. And I found it also interesting that the digital marketplace regulation that is meant to go along with this has actually not been enacted as of now. It basically is meant to give the clear mode of operation as to how government would collect the taxes that accrue from the digital marketplace. Is there a timeline for this? And why has this possibly not sort of followed up with this regulation?
Well, there has been a to and fro on that particular area. Because at the end of the day, what's going to happen is the digital companies will pass on the costs to the ordinary Kenyans. So we've seen services like Netflix that have already increased their cost to the ordinary user. So that's still, the digital community has had a bit of discussion on this particular issue, but it's not quite settled, and it's creating quite a bit of disquiet. I've always said they need to at least give this a bit of space for more discussion, particularly with the fact that now we are also seeing this global tax issue coming into place, and these digital firms having to pay global tax. So there's a lot happening in that space, and I think there needs to be further consultation before these things are actually put into place.
All right, so let's talk about some of the amendments. The amendment in Section 15 of the Act removes the 10-year restriction on carrying forward tax losses. And this now will enable businesses to infinitely carry forward their business losses. Break this down for us. Carrying forward your business losses almost, into however many years you want to. How does this benefit businesses in the long term and in the short term?
Well, I think from the government's perspective, they were looking at how people manage their profit and losses, and the fact that the economy has been challenging and a lot of businesses have not been hitting those kind of profits and have been declaring losses. That fact has been a reality for many businesses, and that has been subject to taxation. But I think what the outcome of this will be for people who have been, for example, hit by the pandemic and they are making losses, that does not necessarily have to attract any fee right now, and can be postponed into the future when maybe the business is able to generate a bit of profit. So I think it's more of just book management, really, but I think it might provide some reprieve in the short run.
All right, so earlier I mentioned that there's a very ambitious budget that's coming forward for 2021 to 2022, 3.6 trillion Kenyan shillings. That's what the presidency, under President Uhuru Kenyatta, is looking forward to. And this is also why the pressure is coming for increased tax revenue mobilization. Do you think that when you look at the debt burden that Kenya is carrying and then trying to put more taxes on the Kenyans and then also having this ambitious 3.6 trillion Kenyan shilling budget, is this a pressure point? Is this a boiling point for Kenyans right now?
Well, it is a pressure point and it's a bit untidy because the way you want to raise revenue is you want businesses to be profitable, to thrive, and to be able to give you the kind of taxes you need to run government operations. But that said, when you make the cost of business doing business very difficult, then obviously businesses will not be able to raise the tax revenue, and you'll end up with this vicious cycle where you have missed revenue targets and you have to borrow more and you have to compound it with further debt. So I think there's still a lack of clear long-term thinking around how we manage our fiscal space.
All right, Ken, we're going to talk about one of the sectors of Kenya's business or economy right now that is already starting to feel the pinch, and that's the agricultural sector, particularly the poultry sector. We'll talk about that when we come back. And he also mentioned the OECD and, of course, this global conversation about tax. And in recent times, we've been talking about the Global Tax Pact that's been led by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. We'll get Ken's thoughts on why Kenya, along with Nigeria, are the only African countries abstaining from signing that pact. This is Business Edge. Stay with us. Still with me from Nairobi, Kenya, is Ken Gichinga. He's the chief economist for Mentoria Economics. Now, just before we get into our next question, let me just lay it out for you. So the Kenya Poultry Breeders Association has said that production of day-old chicks would drop by about 28.57% of 1 million this week from an average of 1.4 million per week. This is because in the new act, all imported eggs attract two types of excise duty, such as fresh and table eggs. We also saw in April, Kenyans protested against 18% value-added tax, a 6% withholding tax, and a 1% railway levy on poultry products assessing the Ugandan market. These all stem from the new Finance Act. So, Ken, my question to you is, what are the other concerns or issues that you're seeing around the Finance Act 2021 for Kenya? We're seeing these criticisms, which we know in the long run will hurt the consumer, will hurt the ability of Kenyans to access eggs, and also will have knockdown effect with bakers and with children and all these kind of further consequences. But what other concerns do you have about this act?
Well, I think from a broad perspective, I think the direct inevitable consequences is it increases the cost of living at a time when wages are stagnant. And in some cases, wages have actually gone down because of the COVID pandemic that has occasioned much of the country. So for me, I think it worries me that we still continue to place greater emphasis on things that affect the direct lives of Kenyans, whether it's cost of fuel, cost of cooking gas, cost of food. All these things affect the ordinary Kenyan citizen disproportionately more than somebody on the upper echelons of society. So the lack of a philosophical framework to be able to raise revenue without being able to destabilize ordinary society, for me, I think is one thing that really worries me.
That's interesting. So when you look at this, are there any exemptions? Because in reading up about this, I saw some of the exemptions were leading more towards foreign firms and multinational enterprises than particularly some of the Kenyan-based businesses. So what exemptions are there in the Act?
Well, I mean, there are a couple of exemptions that are useful, and we saw a lot of areas that were zero rated and were being exempted. But I think specifically when you look at the food sector, and I've always said that agriculture is the backbone of the Kenyan economy. It contributes to 25% of GDP, and it employs the most people. And I've always said, if we can protect our agriculture, we can be able to thrive as an economy. But when you look at some of the segments where we saw exemptions, we saw areas like bread, for example, where we saw a bit of that. But for me, I think in terms of being able to be a food secure country, we need to look at things like fertilizers. We need to look at things like cost of inputs. Those are the things that can really bring down the cost of agriculture so that we can be able to feed what is already approaching a 50 million person economy.
Now, some have pointed out that the new Tax Act and the new Finance Act as well shows a shift in government tax policies towards multinational enterprises. And that's quite important. You want to show yourself as an investor-friendly country. You want to bring in the foreign direct investment as well. But do you think that there's been a shift? Does this new regulation, the new act, actually show you that there's an intentional and deliberate act by Kenya to sort of be more welcoming to multinational enterprises? What do you think has changed, if anything has changed, in your opinion?
Well, research shows that one of the big things that multinationals or foreign direct investors look for in any country is some form of stability in the taxation system. And as we were starting this interview, you correctly pointed out that our amendments come not even once, but even twice a year. You know, so many supplementary budgets running. So I think in as much as there's that lack of long-term taxation stability, even if you're able to give a few incentives here, the fact that somebody cannot be able to see the next 7 years in terms of profit projections still make it very difficult to attract foreign direct investment. So if that is the intention, then I think we need to do a lot more in terms of building long-term regimes that don't change every year.
All right, so it's a Finance Act 2021, but a lot of times we spend the focus on taxation because that's a large part of how countries can finance their plans aside from loans. And in recent weeks here on Business Edge, we've been talking about the Global Tax Pact that's been spearheaded by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Kenya, like Nigeria, has abstained from signing, which puts a corporate global tax at 15% minimum. We've seen the likes of Ireland and others who are more tax friendly, and they have a lower percentage, saying that they have concerns as well. But from a Kenyan perspective, why is Kenya abstaining from signing on to this pact?
Well, there are several reasons. I suspect it has to do with possibly the need to remove the digital services tax, which, as we've said, the government looks at it as a potential for raising revenue to be able to meet its budget. But I think personally, from a broader perspective, I think Kenya and Nigeria are on the right track, because we have to ask ourselves, why do we pay taxes? We pay taxes so that we can return income to the government, the one that provides infrastructure, the one that provides security, the one that provides ease of doing business. But when you think of a global tax, really, philosophically, there is no place called global. You know, every operation belongs to a particular country.
Yes.
So for me, I'm philosophically opposed to that idea of a global tax because it lacks a jurisdiction, and you really can't point to where that is going. So I think, for me, in my opinion, although Kenya might be doing it for different reasons, I think it's something good that we have opposed.
All right, and it's interesting, when we had this conversation on the Nigerian opposition as well, it also had to do with the fact that both Nigeria and Kenya set corporate tax at about 30%, and there's a lot of loss we would have to accept if we accepted the 15% minimum, and also the number of years, I believe it's 7 years before this could be looked at and reworked, depending on how it works out. But Ken Gichinga, we're going to touch base with you again. I know a lot of things are happening in the lead up to some of the elections happening in that area, and this Finance Act is going to have a lot of consequences. So we'll be touching base as those things come to the fore. Thank you so much for joining us today on Business Edge.
Thank you.
All right. And that is the main gist of our conversation on Business Edge today. But the show is not over, because we want to give you a few stories we're keeping our eyes on, so you know where to put your eyes. Follow us. Right after this is NC4 to watch. And some stories that we want you to keep an eye on as we also do the same. We start here in Nigeria, where the country's revenue to gross domestic product ratio has fallen to between 5 and 6% last year. Now, according to the World Bank, this is the lowest in the world. Number 2 on our list, the Central Bank of Kenya's top policy-making organ, that's the Monetary Policy Committee, is expected to keep the central bank rate unchanged at 7% when it meets on Wednesday, July 28th. If that happens, it will be the 9th time the MPC is holding the CBR steady. According to some analysts, inflation expectations remain anchored despite some upward bias on account of the base effect of this quarter. The CBK last retained the CBR at 7% in May. Moving to the southern part of the continent, Mango Airlines has suspended all flights and services from today, July 27th, until further notice. The acting chief executive, William Ndoluvu, said that the suspension is due to outstanding payments to the air traffic navigation services. Mango said customers should contact it via email to deal with cancellations and voucher-related matters specifically. And finally, the 4 in NC4 to watch, a bounty harvest and possibly more revenue is in store for Morocco. The agricultural sector in the country contributes 19% to the country's GDP and is one of the country's most important economic sectors. The GDP number is divided into 2 categories: agriculture, which is 15%, and agro-industry, 4%. The agricultural sector employs over 4 million Moroccans. And that's it on Business Edge. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. So if you've missed any of our conversations, you can, of course, check them out there. Follow us on all of our social media platforms and, of course, watch us live on Star Times. Download our mobile app on Play Store and App Store so you can take us with you wherever you go. I'm Tolulokwe Adeleru Balogun. Business Edge will return 11 a.m. West African time. Do stay with us.